Yeah, well, I'm Ronnie, for those of you who don't know, and 40 years since I left school, and how the world's changed. The Queen was 52 years younger than I am now. No mobile phones. Twitter was birds twittering, not the modern tweets. Outside telephone kiosks where all you had for public telephones, no mobile phones, as I say, and dial phones were the modern thing, not even push buttons. Jim Callaghan was the Prime Minister, David Steele, leader of the Liberal Party, as it was then known. And some of you younger ones may not know this other person, but Maggie Thatcher was leader of the opposition. And then, so things have changed a lot. And the Second World War was still in living memory. Just 33 years ago it had ended. Many people around from that era remembered it, and longer. My dad, he had been in the war at Dunkirk, amongst other things, Africa, Italy, all through the war, and he was then aged 58, 40 years ago, just when I left school. And my mum was 43, and she remembered the war as a child. Although lived in a council estate in Winslow, not many bombs round there, but nevertheless she remembered the air raid sirens and that. And, there are lots of people with those memories, and I suspect there's very few people now who don't remember that era. Well, they won't, very old people and that, but just a completely different world. Left school, as I say, went into the world of work. I was going to, in a few years, own my own home, get married, car, etc. Well, yes, I did have a car eventually. Didn't quite work out, the other two, not marrying or owning my own home. I just was in and out of various jobs, not very successful. Experience the social security system, just one of them things the way it is. And I remember going to the DSS once before I managed to get a first job after a couple of months leaving school, and the process of claiming, and when you went up to the desk and that, the actual chair you sat on, it was at an uncomfy angle, and tempted to move it, and it was welded in, you couldn't move it, and so, I'm helping for uncomfortable sitting and that. And so I was just in and out of jobs and that, sacked loads of times and that, but and of course I'd never heard of Asperger's syndrome long before then, and so I didn't realise that was the problem, and then so that was it was the first few years I was just sort of in and out of jobs, and then after about 5 years I did work at a hospital for mentally handicapped people, and I did hold that job for about 12 and a half years, and the place eventually closed. Part of care in the community it was for mentally handicapped or people with learning disabilities. They changed the names so often referred to, and then so that lasted about 12 and a half years, and the hospital where I worked at actually closed down about 12 months before, and worked at what it was like a community house in Macclesfield, that was then, but then it just came to an end after a year. I didn't adapt to the change, to be honest, very well in working conditions and everything. Problem was routines and that, and it's been the same that with all jobs since. And so that was it. Employment side in those days, and after that I finished in the health service. I went working at the airport for a few years, nothing special, for 4 years, and I did leave that myself in the end, but Alpha Flight Services it was called, and food, the airline food and that, and just putting it on the tray sets for aeroplanes, passengers and that, and so that was quite, it was okay, tolerable and that, but anyway, eventually I did leave and that, and I did regret leaving that, but at least in the short term, because the actual building where I worked did eventually close a few years later, so it would have ended anyway. And then what did I do then? I went in, it was only some cleaning jobs I had then, and nothing special and that, but so that was my working life basically. And then this group, it was meant to be, this talk, it was meant to be about masking and that. I think it is a way of life, masking with Asperger's syndrome. I know to call it Asperger's syndrome, I can't remember the new technical name, whether it's autism or what, because they've changed it. And it's just a way of life, that masking. I think to do it subconsciously, just everything and that, and just live with it. Anyway, I'm not fleeing, I just need to nip out a minute and do and just give you a demonstration of masking. I'll come back in a minute. Hello.
But you don't put up a costume change, we're going to have to make a reference to that in the recording.
That's how I see us.
I was kidding when I said you'd come back. I was kidding when I said you'd come back with a costume change.
Yeah, Donald Trump. USA! USA! I hope Hillary Clinton's not here. Lock her up! Lock her up! So anyway, right, well... That's the only laugh I get, it was worth it. Right. Situation in general and that nowadays... in 1978, they didn't have the problem of homelessness we have now. All right, I suppose there always will be people, who don't have a home living on the streets. But I mean, certainly in my lifetime, you never used to see a beggar unless I was going about with my eyes closed, but I never did in this country. And now, just go to Manchester and you have a job avoiding seeing beggars and just people living on the streets so rough. I don't understand why people allow it to happen. Apathy, indifference, I just don't know. Really don't know. And I mean, in Manchester a few weeks back, I was on a bus, Piccadilly, and the bus was, filling up with people, and I could see some homeless people through the window, and they were on they've had it on the news, a drug, I think it's called, Spice, I might have the name wrong, but they were just, they just really weren't with it in a bad way, and one of them was only in about his 20s, and he had no teeth. You know, that's just the sort of world we're in now, and the only future in paupers' graves in Southern Cemetery, and having a look round there the other day, and they're filling up well them paupers' graves are at Southern Cemetery, and the council had started putting some wooden crosses with just names on of people, and this is, you know, it shouldn't be like this in 2018. It's horrible, terrible that any of us could become homeless, and really a terrible situation. And and then what seems like, you know, completely different, trivial public toilets. That's become a real problem now. There used to be plenty of public toilets about in this country, and now if you get taken desperate, I know it's a silly subject to talk, well, perhaps not silly, but not the best subject to talk about, but it's just a problem. Why do people accept that? You need a public toilet if you're out. Where do you go and that? Apart from having to pay to use a cafe or something, and just ridiculous. And Wales, as recently as this decade, was very good still for public toilets. Loads there and so convenient to use and convenient. But now they're they're starting following England's example. What happened here, must be 20 plus years ago. And it's just, I just don't get it at all, why people have accepted that as well. You know, like I was on holiday recently in Cricketh, and one of those toilets is closed, and I can imagine there'll be another one closed, and as far as I know of the three, I might be wrong, one's closed, and then they'll probably end up just having one by the beach open. I wouldn't be surprised if they follow our example. And then in a village, Tramadoc, the only public toilet that I've known of closed, so if you go a walk or something, it's ridiculous. So that's the situation. How technology's changed since I referred to it briefly at the start. As recently as 1990, well, recent to me, 28 years ago, and some older people, there were only 12 million, I believe, in the whole world of mobile phones. And now, there'll be billions now. And then the tablet, computers, laptops, etc. Incredible how it's transformed life and that. And get how it's meant to make things easier, but I do miss the paper society, like where cinema listings, for example, used to always be in newspapers until about this decade, and they no longer are, or very few. And although perfectly capable looking on the internet, it's just less convenient, I think, because my phone, it's not a smartphone. I did have one, but I wasn't very good with it, and now it's just an ordinary mobile phone. So out and about, you just can't look on there. And then also going back to tablets and that, you have the code and that. Why you have a code for in here, for example, and then you have the outside, you can't use it. Why doesn't it just work everywhere? I don't get that at all. It's just made things far more difficult and that, I think. And then televisions. I remember when young, used to have a black and white television, and the earliest one I can remember as having the picture, it was always, going up and down, disjointed, but only very young and thought nothing of it. And I then got another telly which was better, but had an indoor aerial, did not an outdoor aerial, but just had an indoor aerial, and you only got 2 channels, BBC One and ITV. And and so I remember my mum, for example, at one occasion holding the aerial up, and the picture was perfect, but then she puts it down on the telly and it just goes jumping up and down again. And then anyway, we eventually had a outdoor aerial, and I knew that as the BBC Two aerial because we could get 3 stations then, BBC Two as well as BBC One and ITV. And the telly pictures for that, it was better again, obviously having an outside reception, but sometimes it would go wrong, and I could just see my dad now running up to the telly, bang, that would make the picture clear again, how it was. And and then 40 years ago in 78 got the first colour telly, and so major advance that was, transforming to colour. How it's changed, things have changed. And then the video recorders came along, and it was a choice between Betamax or VHS, which one would win, and they did have other alternative video recorders, I forget what as well, but they were the main 2. And then it seemed as though at one time Betamax would win out because they were a bit smaller, more compact, but anyway VHS won, and so that was that was a major advance. You could record programs now and that, and then and then of course later on the DVD came, got the first DVD player in 2000. Well, say first, I still have it because it works very well. And then the satellite television, and that I forget about Sky. I never got that, but that came in '89. But then Freeview arrived later on, and so I did get that in 2004, and then finally I got a Digibox in 2014. So no longer using the video recorder for recording, although I've kept the video if I want to play some old videos on it. Technology's changed a lot. And then I regularly started driving in 1981 when I passed my test, and my dad was very good because I didn't own a car then. He let me use his when he could, and that, so I had a lot of experience of that. And then in '84 I had my first car, a Mini. It was 1970 Mini with wooden frames on the back. You don't see many of them now, if at all. And that was my first car, and enjoyed the driving and that, and was regularly driving until 2002 when unfortunately, due to my carelessness with my finances, I had to give up the car, and then eventually got a car again last year, and so regularly driving again. And so even though I'd hardly driven in 15 years, it's true, you never forget. It's like riding a bike, and just came back straight away, to be honest. The great difference is the traffic situation. I always remember plenty of cars beforehand, but nowadays it's the roadworks I'm noticing. There seem to be more than there ever were, and they seem to be going on and on and on. And that was and so, there's a lot more hold-ups now, I notice, and it's not as easy to go to places for the day as it used to be, I find, because, like, for example, I'd sometimes go to Cosford Museum along the M6 when I used to have a car before 2002 and visit there, and I never have this time because of the motorway situation. It's just on and on, that M6 situation. It's really bad along there, and I think it's something to do with smart motorways. I believe it's 4 lanes or something, whatever they mean. But I mean, if that takes up if that means the hard shoulder going, I think that's a mistake, because it's needed that for breakdowns and that. What do people do then? And then the section at Sandbach that they're doing, they're taking it further down south and starting down there more roadworks. So it's going to go on, and so, and then they're building a new road to the airport. They are the Winslow area, a road along there that goes to Manchester, and there are very bad delays there now along M14, and that's just been ongoing and that, because I remember at first, when I was first driving again last year, I thought, it'll soon pass all this, and with the technology much better, switching on the radio, listening to that while stuck in traffic jams, but it's just gone on and on and on, so yeah, that's the main difference, the hold up in traffic, and plus I think with this online technology, because online deliveries are very common now, whereas they weren't before. I suppose there are like extra vans on the road, and so that will increase the traffic a bit and all that. But so that's the situation with driving nowadays, and and then us people with Asperger's syndrome, brilliant observation, count me out of that, because I remember when my mum and dad were on holiday at one time, watering the plants in the house for a fortnight, and I never even noticed one of the plants I watered was, them artificial ones, and I just watered it for a fortnight without noticing. God, so, I'm lacking in observation skills. I remember when I was a child, about 8 or 9, asking an auntie, one of my mum's sisters, if I could stay at her house. I think I just fancied a holiday at her house, and this was about winter time, and so she says to me to ask, something about perhaps in the summer, or ask her in the summer or something, and I realised now what she was doing. She was just, she was politely fobbing me off, probably assuming I would forget, but of course come the summer I remember, and I ask her, and so I spend a few days at the house, 5 or 7 days, or anything up to a week, and so they have to put up with me there, living there for a few days at least, all because and that was my Asperger's syndrome, because I'd remembered to ask and that, and whereas any normal person would have just forgotten or just accepted that the real meaning was they didn't want you to stay there, and just politely fobbing you off. So and then facial recognition. As recently as August this year, I went to have my hair cut at my niece's. She has a salon at Ashby Farm near Congleton, rents it and that, and then a few of them work there and that, renting it, as I say. And I walk in at the time to have my hair cut and walked past my niece, saying hello to her, not recognising her because she'd altered her hair, and I just didn't recognise her. And I just walked straight through into the salon part where I was expecting to see my niece, but I'd walked past her, and yeah, my own sister, not recognised her with a changed hairstyle and that. Oh yes, and on the recognition thing, on the telly, very recently, I think it was till about a year or two ago, on Hollyoaks, some two different characters, there were actually two different people, and I thought both these two different people were the same people. It's just facial recognition thing. Very strange, and that, and so yeah, just don't get it at all. Why? And then other times, if someone changes their hairstyle or something, or looks similar, you'll think, you'll realise they're two different people, but why sometimes not? And then remember at one of my workplaces, there were actually two different people who I thought was one person, the same one person, and see them separately and at separate times, and when speaking to one, thinking it, as I say, thinking it was just one person, and then one day two people appear and I realise they're two different people. God, I don't know if any of you have that. So just strange. And then in about 2015, I got cancer, lymphoma cancer it was, and it just came along very gradually. I didn't realise at first, and I'm guessing it was about late 2015 because that's when starting to feel more tired, walking my niece's dogs, and I suspect stress probably brought it on, if anything a reason, or maybe not, maybe not, I don't know. But and so at first I just thought, like for example, I walked my niece's dogs and I didn't have a car then, and I just found sometimes I actually preferred to take the bus up, whereas before I'd been happy to walk up, and don't get me wrong, and I'm still capable of walking there and back, but it was just like more tiring, the process I started noticing. And anyway, this went on for a long time, and then on holiday in 2016, I had like a night sweat thing. At first when you wake up you think, God, you've had an accident, but no, it was like night sweat. And I, so, that was strange. And then a couple of months later, in September 2016, I went to needed to go to the toilet, and blood just came out when I was having a wee, but during the same wee, it went back to normal. And so I just put it down to a rogue incident, and that, these things happen. And so I didn't do anything about it. And then, about towards the end of November 2016, I just became convinced I had cancer, but I still didn't feel I could justify going to the doctors because it was only a suspicion, and I could well have been wrong. They're just normal, just seemed, normal incidents, and that very hard to describe. And then later on in December, Christmas week it was a more serious incident. The weekend after Christmas, I then was passing blood for the weekend whenever I was going to the toilet, and then obviously I really was serious, that this is serious and that. And if the truth be known, I thought I was dying then. I thought, I'll be dead in a few months. I just took that for granted. It was only briefly during that weekend. Didn't think that again afterwards. But because my intention then was, straight after the New Year, I'd go to the doctors and see about it. But I must admit, it stopped and just went back to normal, and so I didn't go to the doctors. And then in mid-January 2016, on the day came not 2016, 2017 now, January last year, it was on the day of a meeting in this building, this room here, that I was again passing blood and that day, but I still came here, and then it was that very week, within a day or two, I finally did go to the doctor, and then it was a question like a test, and that went. I had a chest X-ray at the War Memorial Hospital in Congleton. That was clear, and then and then I got an appointment. That's right, at Macclesfield Hospital for a cystoscopy, where I had a tube fitted in where the problem had been, where it had been coming out, the blood there, and then and I was awake for that, and it was fine. It wasn't unpleasant and that, although I admit I was nervous beforehand, but it was fine. It was nothing to worry about, and I actually did see it on the screen, and anyway, the problem on the screen, and then the next step was I had to go into a Stepping Hill Hospital, this time as a patient, and under anaesthetic they did a further examination, and the idea was they were meant to take a sample, and then a couple of weeks later I was meant to go back to get the diagnosis. And this, I should have got it in April, but anyway, it went wrong, it did. When I was in the hospital there, the procedure seemed to have gone very well. After my anaesthetic, I woke up and that. They'd warned me previously that I might wake up and find I've had a catheter fitted. But anyway, I woke up, no catheter fitted, such a relief, and I seemed to be doing very well over the next few hours. I didn't lie in bed, I was up and about, sitting up in the chair, reading and what have you. I was just thinking how lucky I was there, and when I was going to the toilet, obviously you're given a bottle for the samples and that, and it was all coming out red, but that was to be expected. But I noticed it was getting less and less so red. Had visitors at round about 6ish they came, and they were amazed how well I seemed and all that, and I was just so relieved. And then anyway, they went pretty early, I think, because I seem to remember in my head from round about 6:30 and that. Maybe not much after, but anyway, round about 6:30. I wanted the toilet, so I went, and that's where the problem started. I couldn't go, and this went on, and I reported it as early as round about 8 o'clock. I couldn't go, and they were very complacent and that. Oh, you know, one even advising me to drink more water. And so, silly me, I did. And then, anyway, it just came to a head, and it wasn't until 11:30. It wasn't sort of pain as such a thing, but it was unpleasant, and you know, like you're desperately wanting the toilet and you can't go. And so finally then they did fit the catheter. So so I had the catheter fitted, and then you know, such a relief, I can tell you that was at the time. And again, it wasn't really anything to worry about having a catheter fitted, I'd imagined beforehand, but I'd had experience with the cystoscopy that it'd be horrendous, but it wasn't horrendous. But anyway, I had that fitted in, and I was in hospital for a further couple of days with that, and then briefly did try without the catheter, but the same problem, I couldn't go. So unfortunately they discharged me with the catheter, and I was probably the first person in history that didn't want to be discharged. I'd rather have stayed in hospital with the catheter, because I hated managing it at home and that, and I would just rather have stayed in the hospital till it was, you know, taken out again. But anyway, went home with the catheter, and that was, fortunately for me, there were no accidents. I managed to avoid that, but having to be very careful, because always a complicated process when in bed, having to make sure that it, you know, goes into the bag and that, because otherwise if you didn't see to it, it would not go into the bag. And so I then so I had that a few days, and they'd said to me at the hospital at Stepping Hill that they would be, you know, calling me for an appointment the following week, early the following week, to, you know, to review this situation with the catheter. And anyway, they didn't contact me, so I contacted them, and despite my Asperger's, I actually did manage to get an appointment. And so I went to the hospital, and then they took it out, the catheter, and just stayed a few hours, make sure working okay. Unfortunately, the waterworks working fine and coming out normal and that, and so then discharged. But before being discharged, they did put me on tablets to do with the waterworks situation for a month, and if I'd wanted, I could have gone to the surgery and renewed them at the end of the month, continued taking, but I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't, because as it turned out, they weren't even necessary. And then so that incident was late March, and I can't remember if it was early April by this time that I had it taken out after just a few days, the catheter. And then in about late May, I was at my niece's looking after her dogs, and I'd taken them a walk and that, and anyway, I wanted the toilet, went to the toilet, and I mentioned the sample before. This sample, it came out in the toilet. Fortunately, it wasn't painful or anything, just a thud, nothing to worry about, but of course it went straight in the toilet, so I didn't attempt to retrieve it or anything. Yeah?
3 more minutes, is that okay? So we need to make tea.
Oh, right, yeah, nearing the end anyway, and nearing the end. Yeah. And then, so I needed, so what I'm basically saying, this sample, it should have gone off to Leeds to be tested, but instead, when they did the operation on me to take the sample, they'd left it in me, and obviously just dropped it in me, and that is the only reason I had the catheter. I shouldn't have even needed the catheter. I can't prove it, and I'm not going to attempt to, never have attempted to or never will, because I just can't prove it, but I know what happened. They messed up during the operation, left it in me, the sample, and unnecessarily I had to put up with the catheter, and I'm very lucky there was no permanent damage done or anything, God. And then, but they do close ranks and that, and I was just fed this story about it mysteriously ending up in Leeds, this sample, and it had never even gone there in the first place, but I mean, I can't prove it. It had gone down my niece's toilet, it had ended up, and anyway, of course, April, when there was mentioned before about meaning to have the result, didn't have the result because, and it just sort of faded and all that. And so that was it. I had to go through. It was something in the back. I can't remember whether that was called a biopsy, but I had to have a procedure in my back, and it was quite painful, I must admit, but it was bearable. I could put up with it. It wasn't horrendous. I still managed to drive away afterwards, but anyway, that sort of didn't work. They didn't, get get what they wanted sample-wise and that, and of course it was all blurred over and all that, and anyway, finally in July I have to go for a second third biopsy it would be, and I had that in here rather than me go back to Stepping Hill, and I had that through here in Macclesfield and under local anaesthetic, and and then finally they did successfully get the sample. They took it total of 3 times. After the first one, asking my permission if they could still, yes, I let them, and it was okay. I was fine. It wasn't unpleasant or anything. And then after the second one, they said, we've got about 90% certain now of getting a result, but if we take a third sample from you, it'll be 100% certain we get a result. And so, anyway, I gave them a permission, they took that, but it has had consequences. My appetite since then has increased again, and I have a bit of a belly, and this lump which I've always had, seems to be a bit bigger. So that has had consequences, all down to the mistake by Stepping Hill. And anyway, then, my memory may have played tricks. That might have been June, that biopsy. But anyway, because then I get the result in July, and the letter arrives at my home, and I know I have a pretty good idea this must be the result. So to be honest, I just put it back, and I delayed opening it for 24 hours, and then I opened it. And the relief, I was so pleased, again the first person, because it confirmed that I had lymphoma cancer, and oh God, I was so pleased, so relieved, because going back to the Social Security, the DWP, that's the name, DWP, it means, a cancer diagnosis keeps them off your back, so I was just so relieved to have the diagnosis and that, and just confirm what's suspected all along. And then I just, after that, I went for the chemotherapy that started, and that lasted till February this year, and then that ended. And then now I'm going for an injection every couple of months, and it's not curable, but it's treatable. I have 10 to 20% in me, that's staying with me, keeping me company. It's insisting on, keeping me company, and that stopped me being lonely, so very kind. So, and if I'm being really pessimistic, I don't expect to live beyond the mid-2030s. I've never officially been told this, but it just makes sense. You're cancer in you, and eventually, and I have heard it I must admit, through the internet, and I've seen the figure 19 years, and someone else has said that, not maliciously or anything, and no, I'm not offended at all, but I might be wrong, I might not, I might live longer, I might not, it's the same with us all, might die sooner, might die around then, might die later, I don't know, but I am prepared for the possibility, and if that is the case, it's not that long, just the same as from the early millennium, and it'll soon go, the time, but just one of them things. And then I'll just conclude we start the cancer group. They have a group similar to this, go to every couple of months for blood cancers and that, and anyway, the first session they did Tai Chi, and I'm not a Tai Chi person, just doing exercises and all that, and then and it's a little known fact that Hitler enjoyed doing Tai Chi, because when he made his speeches, after that he'd be very stressed. And so to relieve himself, the stress and that, he would do Tai Chi. It was a bit like this. Slowly raise his hand and that was how Hitler, I forgot the moustache. That was how Hitler did Tai Chi. There, all on film, dream, hopefully. There, my ambition to do to goose step in front of an audience, 40-year ambition realised. No, that's a joke. And so that ends my talk. Thank you. Yeah, and that's why I say you've permission to film it all of it.
Just recorded, not filmed.